Ah, okay. Can you hear me okay? I don't even know if I need this microphone much, but anyway. So glad to see everybody here. Thank everybody for being here. I look around. I'm sorry, guys, you got third string tonight. So, Pastor called me last Wednesday. I was actually out on the golf course with a friend. And he says, Bill, I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel. Can you help me out? That's the pastor. It's okay. Everybody else is gone, so he's got no choice. So you guys are stuck with me. My name's Bill, if you don't know. I think I know most everybody here. And I never have a problem with this because this is like family to me. When I come here, I see everybody I know, and it's just like we're old friends anyway. And this is just a perfect time. So before I get started, though, let me pray, okay? Father, thank you so much. We thank you so much, Lord, for all these things. Like Bev said, let us seek you first. You are here with us. I look around this room, and you know everybody here. You know them by name. You know them better than they know themselves. Do you know they were created before the foundation of the world to be who you wanted them to be, to share in your glory? So, Lord, on that, we ask you that you will just continue to be with us today, cheer us, even in these times. You know, I think there's always times, Lord, and I guess everybody thinks they lived in the most desperate times. This time looks pretty hard. But you know what thing I know, Lord? You are still in charge. And you're still in control. And that we don't need to fear. Not even the sparrow needs to fear. So you have us all, Lord. So we pray and give you all the praise. In Jesus' name, amen. So with this tonight, I don't know if you realize this or not, but you know the 4th of July is Friday. And in fact, this 4th of July will actually be our 249th birthday. Next year, it'll be our 250th anniversary on Independence Day. I don't know if you remember, but back on June 14th, on Flag Day, the United States Army had their 250th anniversary. And you might say, well, Bill, how does that work? Well, because the Continental Army was formed before the actual founding of the country in Independence Day. So, remember the 14th of June this year? Do you remember the big parade in Washington for the 250th anniversary of the Army? And maybe you don't, but it was a big deal. President Trump was there. And it was also one of those times when, guess what? You know, there was a thing that was going on at the same time. There was a lot of people protesting. They had this thing they called No Kings. And I want to tell you about that because, you know, it's kind of funny how things can get twisted. You know, that whole idea that they were saying about no kings, they were saying we want no kings, like, you know, as if Trump was king or something. And I'm not being political whatsoever, okay? Doesn't matter to me, whatever you think about that. But here's the point. It's interesting enough that today what I'm going to talk to you about has to do with the 4th of July. And of course, I'm going to bring it all in. It's actually about the whole country and the founding and the beauty of it and how God's blessed it. And so it has a lot of Bible verses in it, but primarily it's all easy. I'm going to simplify this because there's a lot of other things you could go along with this. But let's talk about no kings for a second. Ironically, just recently after this, or when you see this slogan, it's somewhat subverted in the meaning though. The original intent of this phrase, in all fact. It's kind of like the serpent in the garden, you know. He just takes one word and just needs to twist it a little bit. This full slogan was, in fact, popularized back in the 1760s in the lead up to and during the Revolutionary War. It began by those who were opposed to the imposition by Parliament, British Parliament. They put on the Stamp Act. And I don't know, you guys may not know your American history real well, or maybe you don't remember it, but Stamp Act meant everything on paper, you had to buy a stamp for it. And the colonists weren't too happy about that. And because as British citizens, they said, hey, you don't have the right to tax us unless we have somebody, we give you our permission. So there was a lot of uproar about that. And at that time, you know, it started causing a lot of, and that's when you started to hear this phrase, Do you have it up on the screen? Where is she? Put it up on the screen. It's called No Kings. It's No Kings but Jesus. That was the phrase. And it was also used by Reverend Jonas Clark in Lexington, he was a Lexington, Massachusetts pastor. And after the Battle of Lexington Green, which you may remember was the shot heard round the world. That's when we first stood up to the British, where they were coming to destroy different things and capture different things. And about 300 guys got up there and faced a whole bunch of redcoats. But they kicked them, and they made them go back the other way. And that was the shot that was heard around the world that started the American Revolution, in fact. And the pastor the next day, he used that phrase, no king but Jesus. So I think it's just highly appropriate that tonight we were singing about the king, and we were talking about who the king is. And once again, it's the same thing. Now, the interesting thing that what I'm going to cover tonight is 3 different aspects about the war. First, I'm going to talk about what role the church played in this era. And it was very important. And then we're going to talk about the providential hand of God and the evidence of the providential hand of God during the Revolutionary War and the victory. And then after the victory, we're going to talk about one thing too that's really important today as it was then. It's why the American Revolutionary War and the War of Independence, that revolution is unique in all of history. There's been a lot of revolutions since, but none that has stood and shown itself like ours. And there's a reason for that. And we're going to look at those 3 different things. So one of the things that is really maybe not understood was that back beginning about 1685, but the period is really between 1730 and 1740, it was what was known as the First Great Awakening. Okay? And this was when, remember in England, they had the state church. And of course, the state church was the Anglican church. And just to give you some idea, it was a break off from the Catholic Church, primarily political reasons. And, King Henry decided, well, I got to be able to have as many brides as I want, so I got to get away from the Catholics. I'm joking, but I mean, that's kind of what it came down to. But anyway, so this is an established church. The state of England has a lot to say. And the problem with the church at this period of time, and why we had to have this great awakening, is very interesting. If you think of hierarchy, and you think of strict guidelines, and you didn't have pastors that were preaching anything other than kind of like just straight doctrine. It was kind of highbrow. It was really kind of more for the nobles. And in all fact, it was really controlled by the government. And it really gave this feeling of, just legalistic. Everybody just, you came, you went, you came, you went. There really wasn't a heart in it. And the Great Awakening really kind of broke that. And I'll give you these guys, there's other names as well, but the figures we're going to see that have the biggest impact. The one I'm going to focus on is George Whitefield. But then there was John and Charles Wesley as well. And then there's another Massachusetts pastor known as Jonathan Edwards that probably many people know also. All of these men were part of this Great Awakening. Now, what's important to know is this guy named George Whitefield. Now, he was born in 1714. He was born to a tavern owner, and they had a big family. And he ended up first going to school at a drama school. And you might think, well, what? Like a thespian school. And the cool thing about that is he ended up being a priest or a pastor in the Anglican Church. But because of his training, he had a voice that was like thunder. I mean, he could belt it out. He knew how to really use the diaphragm and push out. They say that over 20,000 people could hear him on the different places that he would go. Ben Franklin even did an experiment, because Ben Franklin became friends with this guy. And in Philadelphia, from the river, or from where the center of town was to the river, he figured how many blocks there was and how many people could actually fit. He was listening to George give his message, and he walked back until he couldn't hear him anymore. And he figured out how many blocks that was, how many people could really fit into it. He says up to 30,000 people could have heard it. So just as a for instance. Now, the reason that's also important is because more than just his voice was what he was on fire about. The things that he taught and how he was so different. You know, the Anglican preacher would get up and he would speak like in a pretty much monotone kind of voice and just go on and all that. Not George. He was on fire. He was known for his emotion, and he would make people weep when they heard him talking. He was talking about being free. He was talking about being born again. He was talking about being born into a spirit. You had to have new life. And this was all way out there for the Anglicans. Now, he was an Anglican priest, but he was known, he would go around to different places, and he got in trouble because of this. And in England, he went around to different places. They said that he went to the coal mine, and the coal miners came out, and he preached so well and so hard and with so much emotion and with such a great message that they said that the tears from the coal miners come down their face that they could see it. Just to give you an idea and how important this is. Understand, it's probably difficult maybe for us to wrap our heads around, but it was not normal back in the 1700s for people to get out and really give the message and really mean it and have impact. And he also made it like this. See, with the Anglican tradition, they it's really impersonal. You know, it's about this great big God and you little person. George's point of view was, no, you have an individual right and you have an individual calling to make Jesus your Lord. And you need to be in that relationship with him. It's a personal relationship. It's an independent relationship. So George Whitefield made 7 trips from England to the colonies over a period of time, from about 1738 all the way till he died in 1765. He died in Massachusetts after he'd given his last bit that he could give. Now, the interesting thing about it, though, was he would go from place to place. Now, he started in Georgia. Now, Georgia, in case you didn't know, it was a kind of a different kind of a colony. It was founded by a guy named Oglethorpe, and it was a corporation to some extent. But it was also kind of like a penal colony. And so he went there, George first went there as a representative or to go along with Oglethorpe's people that were there, because the Wesleys were there too. And he was friends with the Wesleys. So, and if you don't remember, Wesleys are the Methodist people, remember? Okay, so at the time, remember this, in the colonies, there was one church. Now, there was other churches and other sects, but there was one recognized church, the Church of England, the Anglican Church. And everybody paid taxes to that church to support it. And you might be a Presbyterian, and you might be a Lutheran or a Baptist, but they didn't care. Those weren't not recognized churches, nor were they recognized religions as far as the Anglicans were concerned, or the king or the crown was concerned. So he started off in Georgia, and he would go and give his message. And one of the things he's also known, because when he got to Georgia, what he saw was such poverty. These people, like, you know, they lived in such squalor, and there were so many kids, so many orphans. And he started the first orphanage, and it was a big thing. And one of his one things that he's really proud of, that he stayed and got that going also. But to get back to the real story, George went around throughout all of the colonies, all 13 colonies, and he would be the first one that really started preaching outside. And people would come from miles around to hear him under these tent revivals. I mean, you think about tent revivals today. You know, I remember the last time I went home to Virginia, I rode down, I think it's 23. And if you go down that way, there's always that place out on the right-hand side as you get right. I can't, it's before Circleville, or maybe it's right after. But they always have a tent revival there every summer. And anyway, you can imagine, now, these people had never had this kind of thing before. Before George came along, they didn't have itinerant preachers that all of a sudden, I'm going to go out and preach the word. Because you had to be ordained, and you had to be ordained by the Anglican Church. And that meant you had to go over to England to do it, and you had to control all of that. So George was here and he was preaching, and it was so important to understand what he was preaching. His idea as far as, do you have that verse for me? Here's what I kind of wrap this around. This is from John 3, and this is really where I think George really takes his message. These next three, of course, just to give you an idea. Jesus answered and said to him, most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. And then you got the next one for me. You got 5, right? Say to you, okay, yes. Jesus answered, most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that I said that to you. You must be born again. And this is what George's message. But George, they say people would just weep and they would just fall down and they would be so convicted. They wouldn't even go home. They say a guy went and got his wife and brought her back, just like 20 miles back. And back in those days, it wasn't like, you're going to get on the car and, drive the freeway. And this is the kind of fervor that he built up. And the reason why this is so important to me, what I'm talking about as far as the colonial spirit, the spirit of America, and what this does, is because of this, people started getting the idea and the understanding that we don't need these preachers in these churches. We have a personal relationship because we're born again. And it gave them the idea to question the authority of the church. And that gave them the idea that to also question the authority of the politics of the time. And it gave them an independent spirit. And most importantly, or maybe just as important, it tied all the colonies together. It gave them one thing to stand on. It brought them all together. Because remember, these are all independent colonies. They go all the way from Massachusetts down to Georgia. And they all have individual governments and all sorts of different kind of rules and regulations. So they're pretty separated. Some of them are owned by certain kind of corporations. Others are part of the crown. So understanding that it's kind of disjointed functions. So with this, it gave them ability to be united with something. And it was not unusual. People would go for miles and miles just to go hear George speak. And that also caught on to other people. And it allowed the Baptists, which were located pretty much up more in the New York area, Rhode Island, for instance, and in Massachusetts you had, of course, you had the Plymouth Rock people, right? You had all the Puritans. You had in Pennsylvania the Quakers. You had the Presbyterians. In fact, in Williamsburg, Virginia, the very first time I remember, I lived in Virginia for a long time, so I can give you, there's a little church, the first Presbyterian church in Williamsburg. And that's where Patrick Henry gave his speech. Give me liberty or give me death. So, but understand, if you were just a regular church, you were looked down on. You had to give funds, raise funds by yourself, and you had to have other people kick in. And those people still had to pay taxes to the English church too. So this, again, united people to understand this is not right. We need to change this. We're way over here. You guys are way over there. This is not correct. So understanding that, first of all, the First Great Awakening had a great impact on the spirit of the people, okay? And it was because of this that we can start to see things really start to also move. Now, we realize that when it came to the war, now this is another portion that I want to make you aware of so that you'll see the providence of God. The Revolutionary War was a time when just imagine you have these 13 just separate colonies, and they're pushing against this huge, Britain at that time, they just defeated France. They'd already defeated Spain just a couple hundred, or like 100 years before that. And you see them, they're a world power. And they're vast. They've got huge armies and navies. But one thing the problem was, and kind of where it kind of got started too, was back during, if you remember your history, you remember something, we call it the 7 Years' War, but in the United States we called it the French and Indian War. And that was during the time, that was around 1663, and it lasted for 7 years, so 7 years before that. And it ended up being basically that the British had to come over and help us, and we had to use our militia to get rid of the French and to defeat the Indians that were there at the time. Well, all of this stuff costs a lot of money. So the people in Parliament said, listen, all you guys over there, you need to be paying us because we're going bankrupt over here. At that time, they said they were about 100 million pounds in debt. It's pretty serious. Not as serious as our debt here in this country, but it was a bad time. So I know a lot of times we think, well, those darn British, they just wanted to get money out of us. But, they did have a reason. But understand that the spirit at the time, with us being separated so far, that it was a good time, and everybody knew it. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of people that realized economically it's going to be a lot better for us if we can do this on our own. And the Spirit of God that was there really led them, of course, to what we know as the Declaration of Independence. That whole idea that we don't get our rights from any king. Our rights come from God. And because of that, we have the right to our self-determination. And guess what, King? You're not living up to our expectations. And you can't take away our rights. So words like liberty, and of course victory and liberty, and no taxation without representation. And all of these different things really brought home to the people in charge, or the people that were there, the common people, that we need to do something. So in the American Revolution, you have, of course, who was our first commanding general of the Continental Army? Yes, George Washington. And as it would have it, in 1776, one of the first things that happened, Washington was in Brooklyn on Long Island. It's called Brooklyn Heights. And he had about 9,000 men there. And the British troops had come through what they called the Jamaican Pass and kind of snuck on. And they had 30,000 troops. And they also had their big navy out on the ocean, right outside of New York. So, Washington makes a valiant effort, but they get about 300 guys killed. They have to fall back. They're now got their backs against the wall of the East River. Here it is. They're surrounded. They're way outnumbered. And if this army falls, if it surrenders, or if it's captured, or if they get killed, the war is over. So miraculously, what happens? And I don't know if you know this story, just go along with me. But here, it's so marvelous. And you have to see the hand of God in this. Along that time, Washington realizes, we've got to find a way to get out of here. So they realize that they can make it to Manhattan over the East River. But how are you going to move 9,000 guys? Do it quietly, and at the same time, because it's a big problem. So he starts that night, and he starts moving his troops one at a time over boats. They get them to row these boats over over the East River into Manhattan. And as they go through the night, they get a lot of them over there. starts to be morning. It's almost dawn. And just miraculously, a fog settled in. And they said that the way that the fog settled in was it was really weird. It just came in and it stayed. And it fell just in the right spots. So they were able to they say that the guys couldn't see 6 yards in front of them. That's how thick and dense the fog was. And most of the time, like when we hit fog, usually once the sun comes up, it goes away, right? That it was sunlight, and still the fog was so thick that they still couldn't be seen. So they were able then to get the rest of the troops away. So by the time that the fog was lifted and the British realized it, they went to the camp and they're all gone. So there's no doubt in my mind, and I don't think there should be in yours either, that was the providential hand of God. That kind of fog, that kind of weather, it happens again too, which we'll see later on. But just think, if that one thing, and this is really the beginning of the war, 1776. Now later on, that year, we have Valley Forge. And I don't know if you remember that, but that's in 1776 as well. And this is during the time when they're in hard straits. Now, we call it the Battle of Trenton, but miraculously, on Christmas night, George Washington gets his troops, and they load them on boats. And you see that famous picture? You have the picture for me? Is it up there? Oh, okay. There you go. You know this picture? The crossing of the Delaware River. Okay. So they're crossing into New Jersey, and this is Christmas night. So on the day after Christmas, 26th, so Christmas night they cross, the 26th, they show up, and all these Hessians, they're still sleeping drunk. And they work for the British, and they are able to capture them and take all their goods and their stores. Because these guys are starving, and they don't have enough clothes, and they don't have enough weapons, so they get all of their goods, and they also capture all these men at the same time. And it was such an important time because had that not happened, the morale was so bad and so low. So they needed that boost. So that's another one of those things that was just another way that God was working. Now, you can go out throughout the war. They say that Washington had 3 horses shot up from underneath him. He had a bullet through his vest of where he'd been shot, but he never was injured. So, I don't know, you can call it coincidence. You can call it a lot of things, I suppose. But I don't think you can help but see the hand of God in what's going on. Do you have the verses for the providence portion? Yes, Psalm 103:19, love this psalm. The Lord has established his throne in heaven, and his kingdom rules over all. The next one. Declaring the end from the beginning and from the ancient times, things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Isaiah 46:10. The other one, in Romans, so we'll take this to the New Testament, and it has to do, of course, in the famous Romans 13, where Paul's talking about government. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are all appointed by God. So we know that God works in human affairs. We know he sets kings up and he takes them down. Think about Nebuchadnezzar. Remember Nebuchadnezzar, how he was like, man, I built all this myself. I am so great and wonderful. What happened to him? God put him out in the yard for 7 years, and he ended up eating grass like a cow, right? Said, not so much about you, is it, bro? And in every time in history, we can see the hand of God working. And just as much so, too, here. Think about that. I mean, this miraculous fog that allows his whole army to be able to get away. Them being able to cross this deadly time in the winter of Delaware and surprise these people and take this time. And I'm going to tell you now about the last battle. And I'm going to camp here just for a little while. Just long enough to let you know. What was the last battle? Anybody remember the last major battle of the War of Independence? Where was it? No. Yorktown, Yorktown, Virginia. I happen to know that because I grew up there. And I can just tell you so many stories about Yorktown. And Yorktown today is still just a sleepy little village. I mean, it's nothing. There's nothing there other than Revolutionary War stuff, really. The battlefield's being redone and everything else. It's really cool. So if you're a child that grows up there like me, man, I mean, I had Jamestown to go to see the first English permanent settlement that was right down the road. I had all the Civil War history all around me there. And of course, everything that was going on in the independence, George Washington, Williamsburg, all that stuff was there. So it's a sleepy little town. And one of the things you need to know about Yorktown is that it was a miraculous thing again. Now, here, again, this is later on. This happens in 1781. So the war's been going on for a good 7 years now, or 6 years. And at this time, troops with George Washington's troops, there are about 9,000 of them, and they're stationed up in New York. They're still thinking they can maybe make another cross and take New York back. Well, Cornwallis, who was the general at that time, had been going through the South, South Carolina, North Carolina. He'd been doing a lot of damage, but at the same time, he'd been really getting beat up too. A lot of deaths, a lot of where he's using up all his weapons. He needs help. He knows he needs to get somewhere to get refreshed. So he heads up from that area to Virginia. The general up in New York that is in charge of him says, listen, I want you to make your way to this Yorktown because it's a deep, it's a river. The York River is very deep. It's a deep channel. So they can get their boats in there. And I want you to be able to get there. We can get you resupplied. We'll make an establishment of it so we'll have a good way to get weapons in and out, and our ships will be safe. So that's what he's going to do. Now, at the same time, Washington gets a brilliant idea. He says, listen, we're going to set up things out here. We're going to leave a few men behind. And they set up these fake ovens, like they're still there, and they still continue. And in the meantime, he marches all of his guys all the way from New York down to Virginia. And at the same time, the head of the French army, that was Rochambeau, he brings his 7,000 troops into Williamsburg. And part of Rochambeau, you may remember Lafayette, he was with that detachment as well. So they converge there. They have no idea. The New York people, they have no idea. And they converge there, and Williamsburg to Yorktown is about 20 miles. And they surround the area of Yorktown. And they have them completely surrounded, and they have about 17,000 guys. It's a pretty formidable-looking army. Plus, there's Cornwallis. He's really sitting, they're sitting in this place. They're right up against the river. There's no place to go. So they start attacking and bombing them, and if you ever go there, the fortifications and everything are still there. They have redoubts, and these redoubts, they were places where they had their cannon. And one of the great stories of the Yorktown battle is that if you remember Alexander Hamilton was under Washington, and he was like one of his advisors. You know, he's kind of the guys that, hey, go run, do this. He was a lieutenant colonel. But he decided he wanted to be in the field, so Washington gave him commission to go into the field, and one night they took Redoubt 10, and he was in that mission where they have to go into this. They get these pretty nasty-looking fortifications around it, and they are all inside. So at night they storm this, they take it down. When they take down Redoubt 10, they're able to then turn the guns, all their cannons go straight down the British line. That was really the final end of it. That happened on the 16th of October of 81. The reason I say that is because in the meantime, now there's a few things that are going on also. There's a guy named de Grasse who is in the French Admiralty, and his fleet has come up from the Virgin Islands up into the Chesapeake Bay. And there they keep the British, they defeat the British at what they call the Battle of the Capes. And they defeat the British Navy there. And so therefore, they're in control of that whole area. The British can't come in, they can't get Cornwallis, they can't get them out, they can't resupply them. They're stuck. All this perfect timing, Washington moving his troops down. The Lafayette troops happen to be right there. The same time Cornwallis is making this escape, or trying to get this escape. The French Navy comes in just at the perfect time. All the things happen. Cornwallis decides, well, we're going to evacuate. I'm going to take all my troops. We're going to go across the river here. The York River, the close point to it is called Gloucester Point. It's just the shortest part of the river. It's a crossing right there. And it's one of the reasons they wanted to get that, the British did, so they could have, and then they would have control of the whole river. Well, he starts to send troops over, and don't you know, just on the 17th, that very day, when they're trying to go across, guess what happens? A huge storm comes up, and it capsizes and breaks all the boats, and they can't go. So they have to come back. So the night of the 17th, Cornwallis sends to Washington for peace. He's got to surrender. Now, it's just a crazy idea to think that Cornwallis, with all his men and all the things and all the might of the British Navy and the Army and all their resources that they have, here they are facing this ragtag, pretty much militia, and thank goodness we had the support of the French, of course. But there they are, and they're going to have to surrender. Interesting enough, the day of the surrender, the 19th, Cornwallis says, I'm sick. I can't make it. So he sends his general, O'Hara. And O'Hara goes down to the battlefield to surrender. And so he goes first to George Washington to hand him his sword. And George Washington goes, who are you? You're not Cornwallis. No, give it to him. So he makes him give it to another guy, General Benjamin, because that's his second in command. And so it's just one of those things where, oh yeah, really? You're sick? Oh, really? No problem. So then he hands the sword, and of course they give it back anyway. That's the typical thing where they do it. Now the way the reason that's it's kind of puts the point on the story. So the next day, they have to have all the British troops have to march down what's known as Surrender Road, and they have to throw their muskets down. And as they're going, they play this song. And the name of the song that they play is the world turned upside down. Now that's really how it was too. Can you imagine these British troops having to surrender and turn in their guns to these peasants, these nobodies? So here's one thing I want you to think about in the song, The World Turned Upside Down. If you go to Revelation or Acts 17, and I believe it is when Paul has come back into Corinth, and the people that are against him, the Jews that are against him, the people that are in the town, they say, these men have turned the world upside down, and now they're here. Just think of that. Now, maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe it's just one of those things. But the British were playing this song, The World Turned Upside Down. And at that same moment, the world was truly getting turned upside down. Just like Paul was bringing Christ to the rest of the world at that time. Definitely turning the world upside down. This, again, I believe, just all of these different things that fell into place, I don't think I'm stretching it out to say the hand of God, the providence of God, was definitely with the American Revolution in its time. Now, the last thing that I want to cover before we go away today is just to show us the uniqueness of the American Revolution. And why? You know, think about this. There's been a lot of revolutions since. And what was different about our founding? What was different about our revolution? Why does it still exist? Why does it still go on? You know, it's not by accident. We know, again, that the founders of our country, despite what you may hear or might know otherwise, they weren't all Christians, by no means. There was definitely deists that were, Jefferson was a deist, no doubt in my mind. Jefferson had his own special Bible. If you ever go to get a chance, just go Google it and you'll see. He didn't believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, and he didn't believe in anything that you couldn't put your hands in. In other words, if it was miraculous, he cut it out of the Bible. So Jefferson had his own Bible, just to give you an idea. But there was enough people and enough sense with the people that were the people of God that they knew how important it was that they had to have this founding based on Christian or godly principles. Just to give you some idea, at that time, shortly before this, was known as the Age of Reason, which happened again right around 1685. And it lasted until about 1815. And the people of the Age of Reason, of course, a lot of them were the type of people that, like, these are the same people that want to say, we don't need a God. Mankind, we can figure all these things out. If we can't feel it, touch it, and see it, if we don't know it, if we can't prove it in the science tube, or we can't do it that way, then it doesn't exist. So these same people were part of that Age of Reason, but others were also. The ones that were in the United States that had the biggest portion as far as who we concentrated on, here's the people. The English, German, and the French intellectuals espousing the new age of man's own ability to control their destiny, man's destiny. Men like John Locke, Isaac Newton, Adam Smith, Voltaire, Rousseau, and Immanuel Kant. Most of our founders followed John Locke, Newton, and Adam Smith. What was different about them? Well, Locke was the one who really came up with the whole idea of separation of powers, the whole idea of having having those three parts of government. It was his ideas. It was also his idea, the social contract. It was also his idea about having the populace are the ones that get to call the shots. So John Locke had these ideas. Now, along with that, of course, you had Isaac Newton. Now, Isaac Newton was a brilliant science. Everybody knows Isaac Newton. Remember the whole apple falling on your head? That's Isaac Newton, in case you don't remember. But he was a brilliant man. But Isaac Newton, when he did his experiments, he did them and it showed the orderliness of the world and the universe. Because he believed in God. He believed it had to be a God in order for everything to have such order to it. These were the people that the Americans followed. At the same time, there was Adam Smith. And Adam Smith was really one of the first ones that talked about having the market economy. So, the free economy. So these three things were very important in how they were founded. And the fact that we became a republic, and the republic is the ones where we don't have a democracy. Don't forget that. We have a republic. And in our republic, it's because you and I get to elect the officials who do things. But we're the ones, it's the power of the people, and it's each one of us. And because of that, that's why this point, I think, really encapsulates so well why we're that way and what makes the difference. Can you show me the quote from John Adams? Right here. I think this is short. He wrote this to the Massachusetts militia back in, I think, 1798. Yeah. And I think this is it. Our Constitution was made for a moral, religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So when we compare this, for instance, to the French Revolution, because the French Revolution was just in the same period of time, 1792 to 1799. It had a lot of the same people. Lafayette was part of the French Revolution. There was a lot of the same thinking going on. However, the French followed Rousseau and Voltaire. And these guys were anti-God. I mean, they weren't just atheists. They were anti-God. Voltaire said, one of his famous lines is that, I believe within 100 years of my death that there will be no Bibles except what you might find in the museum. It's funny, he died in I think it was 1777 or 78. Within 50 years, there was a Bible society that had bought his property and had a Bible society in his house. So I guess he didn't really know so much, did he? But this is the kind of thinking. And because of this, we see the reign of terror in France. They say that they figure over 20,000 people were just put to death during the French Revolution. More than 9,000 of them were killed by guillotine. Remember Marie Antoinette let them eat cake? And of course, Louis XVI, both of them were beheaded. And just think, it's very similar. There's the Americans, we're kicking out this monarchy. There's the French, they're kicking out this other monarchy. Now, and a lot of these people are reasonable people. They were ones that helped us. And yet, what was the difference? Think of it. Think of how the British, it turned out to be a nightmare. People, because it just became chaos. And people just doing their own thing and letting anybody do what they want. And they let the people, all the prisoners out of the jails, and they let them run the streets. And the next thing you know, there's people fighting against people from street to street. And what did it turn back into? Well, just a few years later, guess who came in charge? A new emperor, Napoleon. So it didn't go so well for them. So think about the revolutions we've had since then. I think the French is so uniquely just like ours, but yet you see the difference. If you don't have a moral, religious people that know right from wrong, people that will stand up for what's right, people that care about other people that want to love on other people that know that they're united in a bond called Jesus Christ. These people together hold things together. If you don't have that, it's just like what John said. It's not fit for anybody else. And here's the warning. Think about this. There's been a couple other big revolutions since then. 1917, we have the Russian Revolution. Of course, it's all based on communism, socialism. 200,000 people die in the Russian Revolution. And where is it today? Stalin, in his time, from 52 to 68, 58 to 62, over millions of people died just in that time alone. Then you had Mao Zedong that came along in 1952, I want to say. Anyway, the Chinese Revolution. Millions of people starved to death because of their poor management and and what do those two things have in common? The communist society, the socialist society, one of the main aims of their first thing we do is we kill all the preachers. We get rid of all the church people. We don't need any God because the people of the God are always going to get in our way. So let this be a really important lesson for you to take home and for you to think about. And when you look around our streets today, and you look across our country today, when you see the people who want to throw God out, and if you don't think that if we turn that way, and we could easily go that way. We've thrown God out of a lot of things in our country. And God has always been a great gentleman. He never makes his way into you. He doesn't force himself on anybody. But I guarantee you, you keep telling him to go away, and we don't need you, and we don't want you. And more importantly, or just as important, we need people of good moral character. And where are you going to get those morals? If it's not from Christ, and if it's not from the church, if it's not from God, what are we worshiping? And that is the danger that we live in today, ladies and gentlemen. When you look around and you see and you wonder, why is this happening? Take a look at who has dropped who has done what. And it's the people that want to get rid of God. And they're the reason we're seeing rebellion today the way we do. And it's no mystery. If there is no God, you don't have to answer anybody. If there is no God, I can do whatever I want. Duh. But if you know, not only do I have to answer for it, but why wouldn't I want all that goodness and everything else that brings with it? The way we live. The Western culture that made us the greatest country in the world and gave us the greatest economy and we gave us the greatest standard of living any time in all of history can be done away with just that easily. So today and tomorrow and Friday, I want you to think Friday. This Declaration of Independence, this time that sets us apart from all other people, this is what needs to bring us back together again. This is our 249th anniversary. Get planning for 250 because it's going to be a big one, if we're still here. But just take that home with you and dwell on that. But when you really light your firecrackers this year, when you have your barbecue this year, bring Jesus with you. And thank God that you live in a country that still says, God bless America. Father, thank you so much for our time here together. I know I told Taylor I was going to go half an hour, so there we go. But Father, thank you so much that you love us so much and you care for us and you call for us and you plead for us. It's up to us not to turn you away. It's our choice. You won't make us. You're willing to leave us in our darkness if that's where we want to stay. But Jesus came into our darkness to show us the way out. And God, thank you so much for that. The greatest gift we could ever have. God bless this church and God bless America. In Jesus' name, amen.